Welcome to Tompkins Corners Cultural Center and happy spring. We're happy to welcome back the Roaring Brook Lake Garden Club and their annual presentation of all things of interest to the residents of Putnam Valley and beyond. Today it is our pleasure to present Linda Zimmerman, researcher, historian, amateur astronomer, and author of more than 30 books. She's made numerous appearances on television and radio, and today she brings her vast knowledge of mysterious stone sites in the Hudson Valley directly to us. After Linda's presentation, if you would like to ask a question, you can either write it into the chat or you can raise your hand by selecting reactions on the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on raise hand, and you'll be able to ask your question directly. Our facilitator, Bill Waldman, is all set. So without further ado, on behalf of the Roaring Brook Lake Garden Club, here's Linda Zimmerman.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me. I will share my screen here and get started. All right. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity. This is a subject I'm very passionate about. And we were just speaking beforehand about the importance of raising awareness for these sites so they do not get destroyed, so more are discovered, so they are properly studied and preserved. And I have been hiking the woods of the Hudson Valley my entire life. And I have been examining stone sites with my particular interest is astronomy. So archaeoastronomy of these sites, are there any astronomical alignments? And before we get into sites in our area, I think it's important I set the stage for, is this isolated? Are these chambers in Putnam County, is it an isolated phenomenon? Or is this something people did all over the country and really all over the world? So the most famous of archaeoastronomy sites is Stonehenge, thousands and thousands of years old. People used to gather here to watch the summer solstice sunrise, and they still do. There's, I think, a waiting list of people to gather at Stonehenge. There's something almost magical about being with a group of people and watching an important solstice or equinox sunrise or sunset. It's quite a connection to nature. This is Choco Canyon in New Mexico, Casa Rinconada. These were the great kivas, and of course they had big roofs over them. So you can imagine all of these people being in the dark 1,000 years ago, and the first day of spring equinox sunrise would come through these windows and illuminate the people. A magic moment for sure. Sometimes if you didn't have stone, you built in earth, in dirt. This is Newark, Ohio, the Great Octagon and Circle. It's magnificent, and fortunately it still exists, but with a caveat. This has incredible lunar alignments, and many Native American peoples marked time with the moon. So we need to look not only for solar alignments, but lunar as well. I visited the Great Octagon about 2 years ago, and you can see it still exists. But if you notice off, I can use my pointer over here, there's some sand and some different looking grass. That's because they've put a golf course in the middle of the octagon. On the one hand, it preserved it, but on the other, I always say it's like putting a basketball court in the Vatican. It just seems to be a complete lack of respect. Squire and Davis in the 1830s and 40s traveled through the Midwest, making these fabulous surveys of these sites. In the upper left here, you can see the Great Octagon, but you can see it was part of this enormous landscape that went for miles. Often these features are not isolated. They are part of a complex, a whole landscape. Sometimes the landscape themselves are involved. You can have one stone that if you stand behind it and look towards a mountain peak, it will be, say, the first day of winter or first day of summer sunrise. We need to start looking at the land in total, not, oh, here's an interesting rock feature, and then put on our blinders. Unfortunately, the majority of the rest of this site is destroyed. Here I am, the look on my face says it all. Where the other great 20-acre square should be is a gas company now. Behind this line of trees is a major highway, removing the rest of it. So just this tiny little field, and you can see part of the earthwork here is remaining. And they have the nerve to call this street Modern Way. And yes, it certainly is. Let's take some remarkable feats of engineering and astronomy and ceremony and just obliterate it. This is the most important slide I will show you today. In our area, in the Hudson Valley, if you were to be standing at the center of this point, summer solstice sunrise would be to the northeast. And what a lot of people don't realize is in the exact opposite direction would be winter solstice sunset. So you can have two boulders set up, and if you look one direction in the first day of summer, you'll see the sunrise. You can also mark the first day of winter by looking in the opposite direction. And the same here, that winter solstice sunrise is exactly opposite of summer solstice sunset. So we'll see some examples of that. Equinox, that's easy. Both fall and spring equinox are due east and due west. And then getting a little more complicated are the northern moon sets. That is not a yearly thing. That is an 18.6 year cycle. Yet there are many instances where native peoples, indigenous peoples around the world were actually able to calculate that 18.6 year cycle and mark it in stone, wood, and earth. When you are looking up at the sky, you are looking with the Western concept of constellations. We impose certain figures in the Western world, like Orion the Hunter, which is a very ancient concept. This piece of mammoth tusk here is 35,000 years old, was found in Germany, and has a depiction of Orion the Hunter. So it shows how important that was to them. However, the Maya and the Mississippian saw Orion as a hand, and the Lakota saw as the spine of a bison. So when you are in an area looking at potentially ancient sites, looking for some sort of correlation or alignments, you need to think like the people who built it, not imposing your own set of ideas on top of it. The Miami Circle, a 4,000-year-old magnificent circle dug into the coral bedrock there, and there was a apartment building that was on top of this built in the 40s, and a developer bought the land and was going to put up huge expensive condos, and somebody said, wait a minute, here's a post hole. They dug a little more. Here's a post hole. And they said it's curving, and they realized it's this whole circle here. And you can see in the sketch, there was a bird figure carved into it. This is an ancient site with alignments, and it took a lot of money, I believe $7 million, to buy off the developer to preserve this site. But if you're wondering what this grayish part area here, this is not original. This was the septic tank that they put into this when they built that apartment building back in the 40s. And if this doesn't typify, again, the modern way of dealing with ancient cultures, just put a septic tank in a 4,000-year-old monument. Back to Choco Canyon. This is an incredible spiral cut into the rock. You can see, if your screen is large enough, you see this is way up the side of Fajada Butte. And they have these large stones standing in front of it. And on summer solstice, they call it the sun dagger, cuts right through the center of that spiral. And there, as you can see here, the illustrations, fall and winter, are also depicted. I hope you can appreciate the enormous amount of effort and planning and work to make something as intricate as this on the side of a butte and be so precise. It's simply remarkable, and we just don't give Native Americans enough credit as to what they were able to accomplish. Cahokia in Illinois, this was a city larger than London or Paris in the year 1000. These posts that are being put up was an astronomical calendar. They call it now Woodhenge. Of course, the wood is rotted, but they still know where the post holes are. This incredible pyramid in the back here was it's called Monk's Mound now. Fortunately, some of it still exists. A couple of years ago, on probably the hottest day of the year, we went up those stairs. You can see St. Louis from there. There are several of the mounds left, but the Midwest was covered with mounds. Speaking of St. Louis, it was originally called Mound City because there were so many of these earthen mounds. It took millions of baskets of earth to construct these. It's absolutely remarkable. And it wasn't all that long ago, several, maybe 20, 30 years ago, that the head of the Smithsonian actually said, Cahokia, I never heard of that. It was this incredible city, astronomical aligned mounds. And when the Smithsonian wasn't even aware, that's a sad statement. This is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which fortunately still exists. No golf courses involved. You can see it has both solar and lunar alignments. Here I am at an observation deck. You can see this undulating mound. It's just magnificent. Once COVID is over and people can travel again, if you're looking for a remarkable trip, I really recommend going out to the Midwest and seeing some of these mounds. After you look at all the incredible stone sites in the Hudson Valley. And this one in Salem, New Hampshire, they call it America's Stonehenge now. When I was younger, it was called Mystery Hill. There's a circle of stones like this, and if you were to stand in the center, that summer solstice sunrise would come up over the point of this stone. So, conventional wisdom, Native Americans never constructed anything in stone in the Northeast until after Columbus, or nobody, even if you consider other pre-Columbian groups. Yet we have this letter from 1654. This is in Connecticut. Sir, I hear report of a stone wall and a strong fort in it, all made of stone, which is newly discovered at or near Pequot. Should glad to be know about it. So the early colonists came upon these stone structures that were already there and had no clue as to what they were. That site he is talking about is called Gunjiwamp in Groton, Connecticut. I'm in one of the stone chambers here. I'll talk a little more about this line of pointed stones here. If you know about Manitou stones, this is a classic Native American Manitou stone. This line of stones is due north-south. And we asked our guide, because they are trying to say everything here is of colonial origin. It was like, why did the colonists need to build this? They said, oh, it was a sheep pen. I mean, look at the gap between. I don't get it as a sheep pen. So my friend said, well, why didn't they turn the stones sideways and put them together to actually keep the sheep in the pen? And he didn't have an answer to that. This little chamber I'm in here, in the back is an opening, and only on the day of equinox does a shaft of sunlight come in and hits a tiny, tiny antechamber here. I had a hard time squeezing into this antechamber, and our guide said, "Oh, it was a storage area for tanning supplies." So I replied, well, they must have really enjoyed hitting their heads because there's no way you can get in and out of there easily to store things. And why would they have built this? I don't think it's a coincidence that they built this, that a shaft of light on equinox illuminates that chamber. Certainly seems ceremonial to me. So now that you see, people did this not only all around the world, but all around the country. Why couldn't they have been doing this in the Northeast? About 20 years ago, I was reading an article in a local newspaper about a sonar study of the Hudson River. They were looking for signs of pollution and damage and found 400 shipwrecks. And the article had a few lines that said, also of great interest, the scientists discovered 2 parallel stone walls under the river that had to be at least 3,000 years old, because that's the last time the water level in the river was low enough to build. And they just went on to the next paragraph, and I stopped and I said, well, wait a minute. Supposedly nobody was here building anything in stone. Who 3,000 years ago was building these stone walls? I did speak to some of the program scientists, and one man said, I don't know that I'm supposed to tell you this, but they are in Newburgh Bay, but couldn't give me coordinates. And to my knowledge, no further study has been done on these walls. So it's very important to examine this and get more information, because then we have a precedence set that at a minimum of 3,000 years ago, somebody in this area was building stone walls. This is an interesting number, 252,539. Our government doesn't only waste money today, it wastes money in every era. In 1871, they paid for a study, the statistics of fences in the United States. What they found was that there were 252,000 miles of stone walls in the Northeast. And somebody did some calculating here. All of those stones would have built the pyramids of Egypt 100 times over. It would have taken a dedicated team of 15,000 men 365 days a year, 243 years. So as this study was conducted in 1871, we are to believe that from 1628 to 1871, this workforce of people were able to build all of these stone walls. And on the bottom, there's some of the population of all of the colonies. So in the year 1700, there were only 250,000 colonists in the whole country. And you can see it took quite a while to build up a potential workforce. So can we not believe that maybe Native Americans learned how to put stones on top of other stones and build walls? Or could it have been some other groups of people here? There was a missionary by the name of Cookin, who in 1660 wrote in Rhode Island how, oh, the Narragansetts and the Warwicks, we hire these Native Americans because they are just great at building stone walls. Well, maybe that's because they had been doing it for generations and doing other things in stone as well. Here I am on one of the most remarkable series of walls in our area. This is called Indian Hill near Monroe, New York. And on the right here, you can see I am standing on this section of wall. It's average is about 5 feet high. The wall I'm standing on here at its widest is almost 24 feet wide. And you can see this one on the left, it starts, it goes up a hill, and it stops. I went here initially with a historian, said, well, this is just farmers clearing their fields. I would give up and move if I needed to move. Somebody calculated it would take decades to move for a farming family to move all of this stone. And it's hard to see, but if you are to look along, there's still stones everywhere all around this. So if their point was to clear the stones, it failed miserably. I constructed a map. I've been to this site many, many times. And that wall I was on, this one here, that it is about 270 feet long. There is a parallel wall, same dimension, 270 feet long. And both of them happen to be oriented to 302 and 122, which happens to be summer solstice sunset and winter solstice sunrise. So are we now to believe that these farmers just trying to scratch out a living, look, we need to make 2 parallel 270-foot long walls, and they have to be oriented to summer and winter solstice? It makes no sense. And there are even longer walls. These 2 walls are parallel, different orientations. I don't know what they may be oriented to, but it's one thing to put on paper that, yes, this wall must have a summer solstice sunset orientation. It's another to stand there and see it happen. This is that section of wall I had pointed out. And you can see here I am pointing up because this is summer solstice last year. The sun is setting, and this doesn't do it justice. But as the sun came down here, this shaft of orange light just illuminated the entire, I get goosebumps just talking about it, just illuminated this entire wall. I call it Sunset Boulevard now. It was just magnificent. 2,000 people could have stood on this wall watching that summer solstice sunset. If you can, it's interesting to see pictures, read about it. There is nothing like standing at a site and watching a sunrise or sunset. and, you can't help but have your mind wander. Who was there hundreds, thousands of years ago watching that, and how important that was to them? I need to point out that when I started this project many, many years ago, a local historian said, well, why did Native Americans need to know what time of year it was? And I was like, really? Survival, ceremonial things, when to break camp, move camp, get ready for the winter. So that's kind of the level we're dealing with when. And then I come in trying to explain the archaeoastronomy of these sites, and it's very difficult. So I can use all the help I can get. So I hope all of you become stone site advocates. This might be familiar to you. The Balanced Rock in Salem, New Hampshire. This huge pink granite, New Hampshire granite boulder on these finely carved, pointed limestone blocks. And for many years, the Historical Society there said it just happened to drop the boulder on these. But limestone in nature is very blocky and square, and these are all nicely tapered. And even if you could say, all right, it happened, the glacier dropped it once, here's almost an identical one, slightly smaller, 90 miles due north in Steventown, New York. It's a large granite boulder of a similar shape on these pointed limestone supports. In Europe, these are, well, actually around the world, these are called dolmens, and there's other names for them. Korea actually has 40% of the world's dolmens, all throughout the British Isles, France, Russia. For whatever reason, during the megalithic period, people were either building tombs or just monuments, putting large, either flat or rounded capstones on support stones. This was very important to them. This is High Point, New Jersey, because it is the highest point. And this monument is a war monument, but I have heard from several sources that there used to be a fairly complex stone site at the top of High Point, which was bulldozed to put in this monument. However, there are still some interesting features here. If you know High Point, New Jersey, there's a Lake Marcia and a road going along it. And there are these three boulders I'll show you in a minute. And Tom Brannan and Dr. Andy Smith made this sketch because they realized that if you stand behind one of these boulders at the appropriate date and look at a notch in the mountains, you see winter and summer solstice and spring equinox sunrises. Here is the summer solstice stone with this very nice white vein of quartz here. And you can, here's the monument, and here's the dip in between the two hills here. And summer solstice sunrise will come right up at this point if you're standing behind this rock. My first attempt at viewing one of these in person was at an equinox. This was the original rock, and you can see for some reason they built a modern wall against it. But it was a very, very cold fall morning. Hiked there in, of course, it's dark. The sky is perfectly clear. And just at sunrise, this thick bank of clouds moved in, obscuring everything. And here I am, and I came up with Zimmerman's law of archaeoastronomy, that the quality of the weather is inversely proportional to the importance of the viewing event. And I cannot tell you how many miles and miles I have hiked to get to a location with clear skies, only at the crucial moment, rain, snow, clouds, whatever, move in. So, which makes me appreciate how finely uh, aligned some of these sites are in the Northeast, given that you can imagine winter solstice trying to view that. Probably at least half the time there are clouds in this area in the Northeast. Kinnelon, New Jersey has this enormous perched boulder here, which may have been, well, clearly this rock was left by the glacier, and erratic. But what some group of people did was, if you can see this here, they chiseled out a point on the top of the rock. So if you're to stand in the center of this site, winter solstice sunset goes down directly over this point. These two rocks here, perched boulders, are very important because if, again, you stand in the center of this site and look between these boulders, summer solstice sunset comes right down here. Now, oh, sorry, I don't know how that happened. I hit something. This used to be a much more precise alignment because right on the top of this hill was another large boulder. And I describe it as like the bead sight at the end of a rifle. So if you were to look through here and look through these two rocks, you would see the sun set directly over that boulder. However, in the 1980s, somebody bought that property because there was no protection on the land. They said, we don't want this big rock on our front lawn, so they bulldozed it over the cliff. So fortunately, these two still exist along with other boulders at this site. And this is important. The state of New Jersey has actually recognized this as a Native American ceremonial archaeoastronomy site. That is huge for this area because I can't think of any other stone sites in our neck of the woods, so to speak, that have been given that recognition. Lake Tiarati in Harriman State Park has another huge boulder. And as we saw that one that had the point cut in it, this clearly has a dip carved. You can tell something has been carved into it. And years ago, some researchers, here's that rock on the map, realized there's all of these boulders on the site. And if you're to stand at this point, you would observe equinox over that boulder, summer solstice or sunrise over that boulder. It's a very intricate site. Again, it's a landscape of features. And that overlay I had showed you, I put it of the directions, I put it over their map and saw that, yes, it was lining up. And it looked like a winter solstice sunset should go down right at the point of that rock. Well, once we hiked up there on winter solstice, I realized the point of that rock was pointing too far to the west. And I was so disappointed. I was sure it would have an alignment, but I wasn't disappointed for long because that section that was carved out here, the sun, it was just this beautiful big orange ball that seemed to nest right in that curved spot. And that is the only time of year that that happens. So you stand on that observing spot, you will absolutely know when it is winter solstice because the sun sets in that groove. I identified another set of alignments there that weren't on the map. If you stand on this one prominent boulder, which actually looks like it has a step up to it, this is Equinox Sunset. And you can see this pointed boulder. If that isn't an Equinox Sunset alignment, I don't know what is. This was a site in Kingston, New York, on 9W near the big, there was I can't recall the name of the shopping center, the big shopping mall there. And it's very unusual. The bedrock had all these grooves in it. And we heard that they were going to destroy the site. And I was appalled. And so I called the supervisor and I said, isn't even anybody going to study this? And he said, well, we talked to somebody who knew someone who said their uncle built it in the 1950s for fun. So the site has no significance. And that was it. And so not only did they remove all the boulders, but for some reason, the entire stone platform, I mean, this has to be very expensive and time consuming. They removed the entire platform, so there is nothing left. Could somebody's crazy uncle have moved the stones in the 1950s? I guess, but we don't even have a chance to study it anymore because it's completely gone. All right, probably what you've all been waiting for. The stone chambers. There were hundreds of them. I still think hundreds exist, and more are being found every day. Well, not every day, but every year somebody comes upon another one. And why I put this later on in the program is because these are extremely controversial. For many years, people said they're colonial root cellars, nothing more. Then there are theories that they are Viking, they're Celtic. A lot of people seem to bypass the Native Americans building them, but at least pre-Columbian. There's a lot of reasons why they don't work as root cellars. And once you see everything else I just presented, it is so much easier, makes so much more sense to say, yes, these were probably part of these ceremonial stone landscapes. These are not it's not the isolated stone chambers of Putnam County. It's the part of the entire Northeast, the entire country of what people built for their survival, for their ceremonial purposes. Here's a great illustration of why they don't work as root cellars. You can see how damp they are inside. There's no ventilation. Some people in later years put doors on them, but it looks as though they did not probably initially have doors. They're dry stone construction for the most part, meaning no mortar. People later on tried to put concrete in some of them, which just crumbled, but you can see corbelled construction coming inward from the ground and these massive roof slabs. Enormous amount of effort and skill had to go in these. And again, talking to the root cellar theory, one historian was saying, well, there was definitely a farm here, and so it's definitely a root cellar. And so we're looking at the crumbled, measly foundation of the farmhouse. And I said, wait a minute, they use this incredible skill to have their root cellar last for 1,000 years, and their house they put no effort into. So not that is definitive proof, but there's a lot of red flags as to why they are probably something else. This is, if you Google the DeLong Cook with an E, DeLong Cook stone site map, this will come up. And everywhere there's a push pin, there's some sort of stone site or site of interest. Now, of course, what we're interested in today is this massive conglomerate of push pins and dropped pins here. What's also interesting, if we were to think these were root cellars, now I grew up across the river in Rockland. I now live in Orange. Fabulous farming land. We don't have a single one of these corbelled stone chambers. If they were great root cellars, why are they so concentrated here? And to look in more detail, I have to warn you, these are not all accurate. They're usually pretty good. Some of the descriptions and locations are off, but if this is an interactive map, so if you go to it and you put your cursor over it, you'll get a rough description and a location. So if you are, there are other sources to find these sites, but I know the Carmel Library has a book somebody put together with pictures and locations, GPS locations. But to give you an idea how concentrated they were in this area, enormous amount of effort and planning. This is the King's Chamber, so-called, in the town of Putnam Valley. Unfortunately, this standing stone here, someone has knocked it down. I just can't understand that mindset. But you can see the enormity of this chamber. I'm standing at the entranceway here and give you more idea. This is the looking out, and the stone slabs that comprise the roof are just remarkable. This is my friend and his two little kids. You can see how deep the chamber is here and the enormous size of it. Now, somebody who read my book was inspired just this past winter, Solstice, he actually camped here. And you can see there's snow on the ground. He's a better man than I am. I would not camp in the snow in December, but he wanted to view the path of the sun from this chamber on the winter solstice. And late afternoon, as the sun's getting ready to set, he said all of a sudden the sun peaked below the roof slab here and illuminated the entire chamber. And once again, this would be the only time of year that this would happen, would be around winter solstice. And if you've never been to this site, I strongly recommend, because along the ridges and behind this area, there are many other boulders and walls and strange features. And also there is another smaller chamber. As you're coming up the trail, you will hit the smaller chamber first before you come to this one. And this was one of the happiest days of my life. This is the Wangtown Road chamber. There are three at this site. And only on winter solstice sunrise does the sun enter this chamber and illuminate the back wall. So it was a very interesting hike in the pitch dark and the cold, getting to this site so you could be there to see the sunrise, and several other people were there. It speaks to the power of these locations. It still draws people, to hike in the middle of the, night before dawn to witness something like this. If you can, I strongly recommend next winter solstice, go to this, hike there in the summer so you get your bearings and you know what you're looking at and looking for. But again, this was one of those sites where there was a farm. The farmhouse is crumbled to nothing. There's three chambers. There's a massive wall, huge, which doesn't seem to have any particular function. And then Hawk Rock, if you've heard of Hawk Rock, is also further down the trail, a large boulder that looks like a rock, hawk. It looks like a rock. And it also has astronomical features to it. But this was just beautiful. Again, that orangey sun filling the chamber. The other chamber, which is 270 feet away, is aligned to the equinoxes. So with these two chambers, you know the first day of winter and you know the first day of fall and spring. And I really would love someone to explain to me why a farmer would go to that incredible precision and trouble just to store his potatoes. Oh, here's the Equinox Chamber that's nearby. Unfortunately, the lintel stones have cracked and you can see there's a partial collapse, so I would not recommend going inside there. But the light you're seeing, I carry this enormous, I think it's an 18 million candle power light to be able to simulate sunrise, sunset angles. And if we were to simulate due east sunrise, you can see that the sun would actually go and hit the back of this chamber were it to be undamaged. It's also built on the side of a hill. There's no way a farmer would, I hate to keep reiterating this, but a farmer would not be able to pull his wagon in front of this chamber. It's just not possible. So completely impractical. All right, the last site I want to talk about in depth is the Ramapo Walls. And that, if you are familiar with the New York State Thruway, as it goes through Sloatsburg, New York, there is a rest stop there. And this site is on the hill behind that rest stop to give you bearings above the Ramapo River area. And the important thing here is this map was done in 1845. It's not the most accurate, but it shows some of the features. And it describes it as supposed prehistoric walls. That's the $1 million word here. In 1845, this site was already considered so ancient, they had no clue about its origins. They considered it to be prehistoric. So, who was building stone mounds and stone sites in prehistoric times here? This is a much more accurate map, which was constructed about 1980. You can see it has some very interesting features, which I will get to in more detail. All of these circles with X's, crosses through them, are actually stone mounds, massive circular stone mounds, anywhere from 20 to 60 feet in diameter. These are not little piles of rocks. You have in the center of this site, these two stone mounds are due north. Here's another set that's due north. These are due north. A lot of indicators here. Here's one of the mounds. I don't know if you can appreciate the scope of it. Again, circular, going up 6-7 feet, some of them. Some of the mounds have depressions in the center, which leads me to believe there must have been some sort of chamber or void in the center of them, and over the centuries collapsed in. I don't know why archaeologists are not crawling all over these mounds, trying to date them, trying to determine if there's anything inside of them. But what I did, because I'm always looking for the astronomical alignments, I started looking and found we have an equinox alignment between one of the boulders and two of the mounds. There's one fireplace on the site, and that would be winter solstice sunrise alignment if you were to stand at the fireplace and look across this mound. And this is just a few. You can see the equinoxes and solstices. Again, the chance that this would be random with a farmer clearing his field doesn't really hold water. And then, well, let me go back to that. Excuse me. Having been an amateur astronomer since I got my first telescope at age 5, I'm somewhat familiar with the sky, and this pattern of stars it just looked familiar. So I was going through star charts, and we took a photograph of the Pleiades star cluster, and here's the actual star cluster, the 4 brightest stars. They seem to match up fairly well with those 4 mounds. Now, the Pleiades was extremely important to Native Americans because as long as you could see the Pleiades in the night sky, it was too cold to plant your crops. When the Pleiades set, that's when it was okay. And they had all course of legends and myths about the Pleiades, how they came about. And if you were to stand at that fireplace and look across over those 4 stone mounds, that's where the Pleiades actually sets. Again, I don't think that's coincidence. In fact, I was able to calculate around between the year 1000 and 1500, the Pleiades would have set right down the middle of those mounds. Now, this line here, this is a huge site. It's about 200 acres. And just to get my bearings, I said, well, let me calculate the distance from the fireplace to the central mound. And I got a measurement of 471 feet, which meant absolutely nothing. And I didn't expect it to. And I said, well, let me get some other measurements. So I said, well, how about the fireplace to this mound? And it turned out to be 471 feet. And of course, I immediately thought, oh, silly me, I just put the same numbers in, but I didn't. And so I started measuring point to point. Every one of these black lines is a measurement of 471 feet. I think that this site was put together with a common unit of measure. I don't know what it is. I started looking for fractions of that and found fractions, half of 471, a quarter of 471. This section here, I think it's like remember back in the good old days when we had paper road maps and they had a key which gave you the scale and the direction. I think this feature here, this lens-shaped 3 lens-shaped mounds, is kind of the key to the site because it's pointing due north, which gives you the cardinal points. And these 2 smaller mounds are exactly half of the big one. You put these 2 together, it's giving you the scale of measurement as well as orientation. These are just some more, I went the opposite direction. I doubled it. These are all lines of 942 feet. From side to side, they're the same. So the point being, can I say who built these? No. Is it random? Absolutely not. I don't think there's anything random about this site. And I think it's probably, I'm going to go out on a limb, I think it's probably the most important stone site in the Hudson Valley. And I am desperately trying to get, historians and archaeologists to come and study and to try to date this, because there is a test called OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, where you can go in beneath something, say a stone mound. If you can go beneath it and pull out some of the dirt, you can tell the last time those quartz crystals and feldspar crystals, I believe they are, the last time they were exposed to sunlight. So you can get an idea of when the stones were first put down. All right, I want to wrap up with missing in archaeology. There was a man by the name of John Finch who in 1824 wrote this long article about what he called the Celtic antiquities of America. He was British. He came over to this country and was amazed at all the stone sites which then existed, and he saw them as being Celtic. And in this little box here, he's writing about, I have been informed that there is a stone circle high upon a hill a mile from the town of Hudson in the state of New York, which attracted his notice many years ago on the account of the remarkable size of the stones and their position. Sounds like something like a Stonehenge stone circle. I contacted Columbia County Historical Society. They had never heard of this reference. And unfortunately, to the best of their knowledge and what we've been able to determine, Mount Moreno, which is near the town of Hudson, this is probably where the stone circle was. And as you can see, these huge electrical towers, which were put in decades ago, the site was probably bulldozed of those stones. I still want to go there and see if, I'm looking at some of these features here. I'm wondering if those were stones that were pushed down. I still want to go to this site to see if the stones themselves might still exist there. And last and certainly not least, this was something John Finch also wrote about. This was supposedly an enormous boulder, curved, that sat in this socket, as it were, and that could rock, that one man could rock this stone. And years and years and years, I searched for this. I was in despair that it had been destroyed. And thanks to Judy and her husband, it was found, and I got to see it. You can see I am just smiling so much. This is not like tree hugging. What this is I'm grabbing this stone, and I, as small as I am, was actually able to get it to rock ever so slightly. So thank heaven this still exists. Developers didn't destroy it. It could be perfectly natural, but I bet you anything that native peoples saw this as a great wonder, something of this enormity that they could move on their own. So this is my quest to find these sites, to study them, to bring awareness to them. I would love to have them all listed as historic sites and protected. And I think these are great treasures, cultural treasures we have here that are going unrecognized and unstudied. So that is, I will get off my soapbox now and stop sharing, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
First, I just want to say thank you for your research. It was amazing. You explained it so well. It was my first time seeing you, and I think you did a wonderful job. You're very enthusiastic, and we can tell you love it. And I just recently started learning about, you used a word which I wasn't familiar with because I'm just, again, learning on the subject. You said it was archaeoastronomy.
Yes.
Which I think is great. I didn't know that was like a subdivision. So thank you again for everything. You did amazing.
My pleasure.
I think Sam Oliverio, our supervisor, would like to make a couple of comments.
Yeah, if I could, thank you, Judy. Linda, your talk was fantastic, and
thank you.
Appreciated. A few years ago, our town board initiated a drive to recognize not only the stone chambers in our town, but also the stone walls, which we all feel are of very historic nature. And we have stated that they cannot be removed, touched, or hindered in any way whatsoever. Otherwise, you can face some very big fines here. And actually, if you were to face one of these, it's akin to destroying a historic object. And we passed that unanimously, and it's in our books. And we are always on the outlook for any developers who wish to build a house or a small business, whatever, we send our wetland inspector and our engineer over to make sure that there are no stone walls and no stone chambers to be destroyed, because they are, I have to agree with you, part of antiquity. Look, this whole nonsense about, a chamber for preserving food. What the pioneers did and the colonists did was to dig a hole a few feet down below the frost level, put their food down there and cover it with a board. Real simple. Didn't take, this quantum effort to build a stone chamber to preserve food. It's ridiculous. A preservation back then was keep it below the frost line, and you're going to have an even temperature throughout the year. So I agree with you 100%. These were not built. They were built many, many hundreds of years before that.
Absolutely. And thank you. Could I possibly get a copy? Is there a statement as to the preservation, or where would I go? I would love to see a copy of that, because what you've done there is just magnificent, and I hope other areas will follow.
That's a resolution in our town code, and I can send you a copy.
I would really appreciate it. I am applauding you, because that is exactly what we need. People like you, opening people's eyes. These are not to be knocked down for a 7-Eleven.
I agree.
Thank you.
I believe Rob Buchanan has a couple of comments. Rob, are you there?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, Linda, Judy, and all my friends present here on this Zoom meeting on a fine Sunday morning. First of all, I would like to make a comment about the Native Americans. I feel that sometimes we speak of Native Americans in the past tense, particularly with their involvement in ceremonial stone landscapes. I'd like to let everyone know that the Native American community is very interested in studying, researching, and preserving stone monuments. If you can search the name Doug Harris or Evan Pritchard, they've done a tremendous amount of work researching and cataloging stone sites throughout the Northeast, many of which have been threatened by gas pipeline and solar farm development. So please acknowledge, or please know, that the Native Americans are still here and they're still very active in preserving stone structures. And given that, there are a vast variety of stone structures which hold ceremonial or sacred value to Native Americans, which are not alignments, which have to do with effigies, which have to do with healing traumas in the environment. So there is a wide variety of stone structures which are very interesting, that also which don't have to do with solar or star alignments. And also, two other quick points. One, I think it is appropriate that we do acknowledge whenever we can the Native American presence, or the traditional ownership of the land that we talk about. Tompkins Corner is on the traditional land owned by the Wappingers people, the Knockband people, of the Wappingers people. So I think it's important, and maybe Tompkins Corner could put that into practice, that in their when they're presenting live or Zoom meetings, that they acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, because I think that also would go a long way to the respect and preservation of stone structures. And the last point, I offered to Judy and to Tompkins Corner I also have a couple of presentations on the origins of the stone chambers and putting the stone chambers into the context of other ceremonial landscapes which occur pretty much throughout Putnam County and throughout Putnam Valley. And I think you get a different view of the chambers when you see the wide variety of other stone structures which surround them. So I volunteered to give those presentations at Tompkins Corner, and I'm waiting to hear if that's going to come about. But so people on the board there or on the programming committee, please consider that and let me know. But thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you. And yes, certainly there's a lot of aspects to these sites. My particular field of interest are the astronomical alignments, which is why it was so heavily presented here. And also, I just yesterday finished watching a 4-part series by the Nolambika Association. It was Doug Harris and Evan Pritchard in a series of films about their efforts the efforts that are ongoing to preserve these stone sites across New England. So if you're interested in this topic, check out the Nolambika, again, Doug Harris, Evan Pritchard, and also NERA, NEARA, is an organization, New England Antiquities Research Association. So there are people doing amazing work trying to study and preserve these sites.
Okay, so Ina's question is about oxen and the stones that are on top of the stones. Could they have been brought to where they are now by the oxen?
Well, certainly oxen would have been strong enough to move those stones. And if oxen were available, I'm sure they were absolutely used for that purpose. That's one of the things I have a question with the chambers. Where was the source of those roof slabs? Where were that rock sourced? There's a Native American site at Fort Drum, which is in northern New York. And for years, they were walking by this pile of stones, not recognizing it as anything. And a geologist walked by and said, wait a minute, those stones don't belong here. They were brought from about a mile away down the hill in the river. They were river cobbles, which had been brought to that site as an act of giving, of a ceremonial procedure. So we need geologists to look at all of these. Were the stones just moved from 20 feet away? Were they brought in from somewhere? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered with them. But certainly oxen would have been very helpful.
So, Steve Kaplan?
That was a really marvelous talk. Very, very well prepared material. I have a question. That is, Linda, do you have GPS coordinates in your book for these sites?
For many of them, I do. I tell you exactly where to park and how to get there. So, not all of them. Some of them, private land. But yes, because I am encouraging, particularly like the Ramapo Walls or Lake Tiarati site, boots on the ground. People seeing. I'm one person. I want other people with all of their knowledge to look at these sites and see if they see something different.
I have a couple of comments too. When I was 11, I took my first hike in the Hudson Valley to Lake Tiarati. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Second of all, some of you musicians in the audience might remember Utah Phillips, the golden voice of the Great Southwest. And about 25 or 30 years ago, we were talking to him, and he asked us, do you know where some of the sites in Dutchess County are? I heard about them. I think maybe the Vikings did them. And we didn't hear from him afterwards, and we didn't know whether he had gone there at all. But it was a really interesting thing that someone from the West had heard about this.
Wow.
So
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and enjoy those sites.
We will.
Sandy McKenzie.
Okay. Two couple of things. One is there's a book by John Burke called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. And he went around analyzing sites with a magnetometer and other devices. And he discovered that certainly that East Fishkill, the rock on the stone, has basically a huge earth, like a fault under it. It's like a fault line it's sitting on top of. Secondly, in the chambers, he was a seed technologist, and in the chambers he found that there was a energy point, which is like a vortex, and if he put seeds on that point, they would germinate faster and be more resistant to cold. So it could be that the natives repurposed those chambers, but there's definitely spots. He actually put the ancient seeds on them. And the third person who I've been involved with is named Saul Trento.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now he uses a magnetometer as well. John Burke uses it. And they found all sorts of magnetic anomalies, particularly to do with those perch boulders. So there are people using other kinds of science, like magnetometers and voltmeters, and to investigate these sites.
Yeah, so my theory on that is that these sites were not put there by accident. People are sensitive to the Earth magnetic field. And I've read articles where before we started surrounding ourselves with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and radio, all of this electromagnetic spectrum and moved inside, people who live out in the woods, out in the wild, were much more sensitive. And if you come to an area that has an unusual magnetic field, your body can sense that.
If you're a dowser, Linda, I'm a dowser, and you could find them long before these books. I was told that in every chamber you could find a place where your rod will spin, and it always happens. It turns out that's where John Birch says these vortexes are. But there's another thing about the lines going north, because the North Star Draco was very admired back several thousand years ago. And there's a view that the lines that point north point to Draco.
Yeah, certainly because of the Earth's precession, the sky patterns, the positions change. Our North Star was not our North Star.
Yeah, but Draco was back when those, if you was, I believe they were there before Christ. And Draco was definitely what you point things that point north towards.
I'll have to, I have a friend who does dowsing, so I will have to bring her to some of these sites.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Tom
has a question. What do you make of the magnetic anomalies present in many of the chambers?
Yes, that I was just alluding to. I think Native peoples who were sensitive to that, and some people still are, felt that there was something unusual about that site, and that's why they put the chambers there, because they knew it was something unusual. I don't think they put a chamber down and suddenly it had a magnetic anomaly. No. I think it was the reverse. There's a group, an indigenous group in Australia, who they have no word for north and south. Everything is the cardinal points. For example, they'll say, could you move to the northeast? I want to sit down. Or, you have a stain on your southwest pant leg. they're so attuned. They really have these internal compasses. They know where the points are at all times. And I think that's what people living, in nature had that ability. All animals have that ability. It's called magnetoreception. Birds see magnetic fields. They physically see magnetic fields in the sky. That's how they navigate. Animals sense it. So it's one of those senses that we've, I think use it or lose it. And a lot of us have not used it.
Ellen Markowitz.
Hi. I'm actually Alicia on Ellen's computer, but Linda, that was great. I have a few questions. Have you been to the little stretch of Fahnestock that's on the west side of Lake Oscawana in Putnam Valley, the ridges and the woods there by any chance? Because it's crisscrossed with stone walls and there's a perched boulder. And I hike there all the time. And
is that near the double chamber by the elementary school? Is that where? Do you know where the elementary school and across the street there's a double chamber?
I've seen that. It's not near there. It's
okay.
Lake Oscawana. It's long. It runs kind of north-south. And on the west side of it, there's a ridge that is now part of Fahnestock State Park.
Okay.
And hiking trails. And so they're actually all over Putnam Valley. There seem to be these crisscrossing stone walls. So I'm wondering, are those mysterious, all the stone walls, or are they farmers' walls, or do you think they are Native American walls? And if you want to come, I'll take you to the perched boulder here.
Oh, I'd love to see that. Yeah, that I'm not familiar with that one. It's tough to tell. Every site is different. If you get an old survey map and find out there was a farm there and the farmer put in stone walls, well, that explains it. If you find out nobody farmed that area and there's no explanation for the walls, and going back to the alignments, if you find alignments, I think that's another point towards them being more ancient. So it is a mystery, and I can't get enough of it.
It's just a short drive to the elementary school, so it's in the area.
Okay.
And other chambers that are in the area.
If you could email me, and maybe someday post-COVID, come and take a look at them.
And there's also a lot of big stones with a bunch of little stones piled on top of them. And someone said, "Oh no, those are erratics." Are those possibly something Native American? Or
if you look at, there's a fabulous site, Overlook Mountain site. It's near Woodstock, New York. They have hikes and tours. I strongly recommend you taking one of their tours. Glenn Kreisberg, he's fabulous. And you will see these large boulders and tons of tiny little rocks piled on top. They call them cairns. And sometimes they're just you can't relate them to anything. Sometimes there's in patterns. Speaking of Draco, he found on the site that a series of these cairns are aligned exactly in the pattern of the constellation Draco. So I would be suspicious that they are something more ancient. I'd have to see a photo. Someone just sent me a photo this morning, which was phenomenal, of unbelievably finely stacked, undulating wall of stones on top of a large boulder. And, to what purpose would that have been made, other than something of great significance to the builder? So,
and I'm just curious where in Rockland you grew up. If
Pearl River?
Yeah, okay. I grew up in Spring Valley, I suppose.
Oh, okay. We were neighbors.
We went to different schools together.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you.
We have a question from Jeff Corin.
Yeah, thank you. So it's not so much of a question, it's kind of a point of information. I have a friend of mine who I was just talking about some of these structures. He just moved to Ohio and was talking about some of the huge mounds there. But one of the things that he mentioned, which might be a lot of fun, is I don't know if you're familiar with something called the signal tree. So what he explained to me was that the Native Americans would have caches of food and supplies in various different places. And if you see a tree that was actually, they would take a branch and they would bend it over and would point it in a particular direction. And it just so happened I was walking on the north end of the lake at Lake Asquana at Sunken Mine Road, and now you can see through the trees because there are no leaves on them. And I saw this tree that was bent at a particular angle. It was kind of high up, and it usually points in a direction where there are these caves. So I haven't had a chance to explore it yet, but it's just kind of a fun thing to know.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, to kind of make like almost an L shape or something in the...
Well, kind of a pointer, like an arrow.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So if you see anything like that, just follow it and who knows.
Right.
Find,
Excellent. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And Chris Rosen, you've got a question or a comment?
Yeah. Hi, Linda. Thank you so much. This is really fantastic. I have the book. I love it. I'm on the board at Tompkins, so I'm really happy you could do this. I wanted to tell you I've been wandering the woods here for about 25 years, and when I first started doing that, for a couple of years, I camped a lot in places that were not necessarily in the park, but all around the wilderness of Putnam Valley. And one of them that I wanted to mention was kind of a little bit north of where I guess they call it the Great Stone Chamber. There's a really big one in Putnam Valley.
Probably the King's Chamber.
King's Chamber, I guess they call it. But we didn't spend much time right around there, but a bit north of there, maybe a quarter mile, half a mile in 1,000-acre area north of there. That's just recently become part of Fonstock. We often camped, a friend of mine and I, in an area that had a big stone pile. And we named the campsite Rocks because of the pile. But anyway, there was that and some other amazing, odd-looking spots around there. And I also experienced, not there, but other places, one down by Graymore and one over by Bryant Pond, some really massive walls, similar to the massive ones you showed. They didn't stop and start so blatantly like that, but the size of them was similar to those. And anyway, just wanted to mention those. I'd be happy to show them to you anytime, or if you ever want company on one of your research walks, I'd love to help.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, you know what we really need is, it sounds like we need a catalog of sites. Have everybody contribute. And I don't know if anybody has done that publicly, put together something like that, but certainly so many people have sites like you just mentioned that I haven't heard of, and there just needs to be a central repository of where these all are, and I think we would all be amazed at how many more there are than we ever imagined. I see someone just put up NERA has a site register. They do, but I think there's a lot that is not on their register.
Oh. I just wanted to show everybody, if you can see this with my virtual background. I guess you can't. But it's John Cohen, our own John Cohen from Tompkins Corners, went into the King's Chamber and took a photograph some years ago and gave it to us as a solstice present. I'm sorry it's not showing up. I'll figure out a different way to get this to you, Linda, because I think you'd really like to see it.
Oh, thank you.
And I think it's a great idea to start a catalog of, and you would be the hub, right?
I'm it. Tag, I'm it. Yes, and I'm trying to keep up with people posting things, but if you have photos, yes, please post them on my Facebook, my Mysterious Stone Sites Facebook page for people to see and comment. But certainly I know there has been a catalog of chambers done at least once. But yes, we need a central catalog.
We'll do that before next year when you come back.
Sounds like a plan.
So are there any other questions or comments?
Could you give us any more detail about where that rocking stone in Peekskill is located?
No, I'm sorry. It's private property, and it still exists, and that's the important thing. So I don't want, I can't have people going on this private property.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Linda, for a really wonderful presentation. Before we shut down our computers and run outside on this beautiful spring day, maybe explore some of the nearby stone chambers. I'd like to remind you that at 3 p.m. today, we have our Poets Corner, and you can find a link to that in the chat. On April 17th at 2 p.m., Tompkins Corners will present our first outdoor event of the year. Jonathan Crook performing fairy tales found in film for the whole family. Our Storytelling for Families series is made possible in part through the Putnam Arts Council's Arts Link grant program, with public funds provided through New York State Council on the Arts, with support from Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, and with public funds from Putnam County. And on Sunday, May 2nd, another outdoor event, we'll be having the annual Pete Seeger Festival with performers you have grown to love and some new faces as well. If you're not on our mailing list and you would like to sign up for our events newsletter, it's at tompkinscorners.org. I think Bill has put that in the chat. And I guess that's it. We always are happy to accept donations. And once again, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Bill. Thanks to all of you for coming. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.